The Colorado Avalanche organization has a problem. They can't draft beyond the first round. And let me be upfront about this. I do think this is a real problem that the Avs need to get better at. But they've literally won a Stanley Cup in the middle of this dry spell, so it's not like it's the end of the world. They've drafted very well in the first round, guys like Landeskog, McKinnon, Makar, Byram, Rantanen, and there are some other okay picks as well. Yes, they have a few misses in the first, but certainly they've drafted as well as just about anybody in the first round. And if you don't believe me, remember that Cale Makar was a 4th overall pick. So there's 3 teams the Avs have drafted better than. The Avs are also one of the best teams in the league when it comes to building their team via free agency and trade. I think that statement speaks for itself. There are literally memes about how you should not make trades with Joe Sakic, even though Chris McFarland is the GM now. And we've regularly seen them hit ace free agency moves that include players like Jonathan Drouin. So even with this problem, the Avs were still able to build a championship caliber roster and are a perennial playoff team. So this is not a huge deal, but it is a problem. Can you guess the last Avs player not from the first round drafted by the Avs to play at least 100 games for the Avs? If you guessed Ryan O'Reilly or Tyson Barrie, you are correct. They were drafted in 2009. By the way. So yes, it has been 15 years since the last time an Avs player has played at least 100 games while being drafted by the Avs beyond the first round. It's been a while. It feels a little unfair to count the last 2 years against them because it's just too soon for someone to have played 100 games, literally impossible. But if you go back to 2022 and before, so 13-year stretch, that makes 67 picks, where the Avs have picked beyond the first round and failed to get even 100 games out of a single one of those picks. If you are not sure, that's bad. Even if you feel like that's too soon and you go back to 2020, so it's just an 11-year stretch, that's still 61 picks. And I'm not going any further back than 2020 because the Avs literally drafted a player that's played 100 games in 2020. They just didn't sign him. And somebody else did. Just to be clear on how bad this is, there is no other team that has gone that long in modern NHL without hitting on one of their non-first round picks. The only other team that technically sits at 0 like the Avs is Seattle, and they just haven't been around that long, and it looks pretty likely that next season they will have a second round pick that has played at least 100 games for them. So the Avs are just behind in this category. Most teams in this stretch have hit 3, 4, 5 guys. Some have even pushed into the double digits. Meanwhile, the Avs can't even get 1. And there is some context here, for sure. I think the Avs understand that they're bad at this. In more recent years, they've regularly traded their second and third round picks because they know they're just not going to hit on them, so why not get value elsewhere? That's just kind of smart from Colorado. It doesn't fix the problem, though. The Avs are entering into their 4th head of amateur scouting this season, so even a few scouting changes hasn't really fixed this problem for them. And while I believe there might be some hope on some guys that could end this streak, it even gets worse. When you remove the caveat of having to play 100 games for the team that drafted you, the Avs do have a few late rounders that have played at least 100 games. 6 to be exact. So that means 6 out of, call it 67 if you're going for 13 years, or if you believe that's too soon, 61 if you're going for that 11-year stretch. So even on the kinder version of that, that's less than 10% hit rate on those non-first round picks. Just to be clear on that, studies of the NHL Draft show that the average 7th round pick has about an 11% chance of playing at least 100 games in the NHL. The Avs, if they had drafted every single one of those picks in the 7th round, would still be below the expected average. And let me tell you, not all those picks are in the 7th round. There are plenty of second and third rounders in there. When you include those types of players, the vast majority of teams are at minimum pushing double digits, and many of them you're talking about in the 15 to 20 range, a 1 per year type of rate. Colorado at best is finding 1 every other year, and at worst we're talking about 1 every 3 years. They are just getting blown away in this category by pretty much every single NHL team. Looking back at players that actually played for your organization, honestly, the Avs haven't even come all that close to finding a player in the later rounds that has played 100 games for them. The closest is back in 2010 with Calvin Pickard, who played 86 games for the Avs, so That's close, but would only move up that deadline 1 year. The next closest is Anton Lindholm, who only got to 66 games. There's no other player that has even reached the 50-game mark in Colorado. All of the other players that reached 100 games drafted by the Avs did the majority of their play outside of Colorado. That group of 6 includes Nils Aman, AJ Greer, Will Butcher, Calvin Pickard, Michael Bournival, and Joseph Blandisi. But the realities are it continues to get even worse. Yes, those 6 players all reached the 100-game mark, but it's hard to say any of them were everyday NHLers. The only one of those players to reach the 200-game mark was Will Butcher. He reached about 275, so that's a solid 3.5 NHL seasons. That's not nothing, but even he was out of the NHL pretty quickly. And you know what? Fair enough to a certain extent, especially for the true later rounds. Getting players like that is fine. It's pretty acceptable, and there are plenty of other teams that get that type of player regularly with their late round picks. The Avs haven't even gotten a quality, honest middle 6 regular player out of these draft picks, regardless of who they play for. Meanwhile, other teams are maybe not regularly, but sometimes getting top 6 or even star level players outside of the first round. Matias Maccelli in what is now Utah, Sharon Govich and Bratt in New Jersey, Jason Robertson in Dallas, Sebastian Aho in Carolina. Kirill Kaprizov was a 5th rounder for Minnesota. Braden Point, a 3rd rounder for Tampa. The list goes on, but you get my point. The Avs aren't even in the same ballpark as most of these teams. And yes, there is some luck factor there, of course, but the Avs could literally take any public draft guide that's out there and just pick the best player available when their picks come up past the first round, and they'd probably have done a better job than what they have over the last 10 to 15 years. Sometimes it's not fair. Connor Timmins, a career derailed by injury, a guy that certainly would have played 100 games even if not in Colorado. Maybe he still gets there, who knows. Player like Will Butcher, who ultimately decided not to sign in Colorado even when at the end the Avs wanted him. So the problem goes a little bit beyond drafting here. There are struggles to get the right guys to where they need to be too. I don't want this to all be completely a downer, as there are 2 players currently on the Avs roster that there is some hope could break this streak. Both players come from the 2018 draft, one from the 3rd round in Justus Annunen, who looks like is going to be the Avs backup this year. He has 18 games played so far. As a backup, you're probably looking at least 3, maybe 4 more seasons for him to hit that 100-game mark, but could very well do it. And the 6th rounder from that year in Nikolai Kovalenko. Nothing is guaranteed, but there's a decent chance he makes the Avs lineup this year and plays full-time, and could be the guy to finally snap that streak. There are options a little bit further into the future as well. Someone like a Sean Barons starting in the AHL for this year, or even more recent Ilya Nabokov taken in the 2nd round in this most recent draft. Maybe there is some hope that the Avs can break this horrible streak, but it continues to baffle me because the Avs have used plenty of other teams' 2nd round or later players to good effect in their NHL lineup. Guys like Ryan Graves, guys like Dennis Malgin, guys like Nick Aube-Kubel. He was on the Cup championship team for Colorado. The Avs can find these guys at the pro level, but for whatever reason, down the draft list, they just seem to struggle. In their current cap hell era, it's something that they're going to have to get better at to take advantage of those ELCs internally. You can't always find all of your solutions externally, and Colorado has got to learn that.